The silence out here had a weight to it. Back in the city, silence was just the absence of noise, a brief, hollow pause between sirens and the rumble of the train. Here, it was a presence, thick with the scent of dust and distant pines, broken only by the buzz of a lazy fly or the creak of old leather. For 3 months, I had been a ghost haunting this landscape, my old life a bad dream I was still trying to shake. I'd lost the job, the apartment, the man I'd mistakenly thought was a future. All of it had evaporated in a puff of smoke and spreadsheets, leaving me with nothing but a duffel bag and a phone number for my Uncle Ben's ranch in Wyoming. He'd taken me in without question, giving me a bunk in the spare room and simple, mind-numbing tasks that required no ambition, no creativity, no soul. It was exactly what I needed. I spent my days mending fences, clearing brush, and trying to forget the person I used to be. A person who had plans. A person who used to talk more. My emotional landscape was as flat and uneventful as the dusty plains stretching out from the porch. I observed my new life rather than participated in it. I watched the other hands, men with sun-creased eyes and calloused hands, and felt a universe away from them. They moved with a purpose I couldn't comprehend, their lives tethered to the seasons and the needs of the animals. My life was tethered to nothing. And then there was Cole. He was the foreman, a man who seemed carved from the same rock as the mountains that loomed on the horizon. He was quiet, not in a shy way, but in a way that suggested words were an unnecessary expense. He moved with an unnerving economy of motion, every step, every gesture, having a clear and definite purpose. I watched him more than anyone. I watched him calm a spooked mare with a low murmur and a steady hand on her neck. I watched him lift hay bales as if they were pillows. I watched him stare out at the setting sun, his face impassive, and I wondered what, if anything, was going on behind those steady, dark eyes. He was an enigma, a puzzle I had no right to solve, and my fascination with him was the only thing that felt real in my hollowed-out existence. It was a quiet, hopeless ache, another secret to add to the pile. The catalyst arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by my uncle over lukewarm coffee. "Leo," he'd said, his voice raspy from his first cigarette of the day. "That storm last week knocked the hell out of the north pasture fence. Section along Coyote Creek is probably down. Need someone to ride out there with Cole? Check the line. It's a 3, maybe 4-day job. You'll be packing in." My stomach did a slow, nervous flip. For days. Alone with Cole. The idea was both terrifying and thrilling, a jolt to my dormant nervous system. "He needs a hand with the supplies, setting up camp. Just do what he tells you," Ben added, stubbing out his cigarette. He looked at me, his gaze softer than usual. "The air out there will do you good." I just nodded, unable to form a coherent sentence. My world, which had been static for months, was suddenly, violently, in motion. An hour later, I stood by the old Ford pickup, watching Cole load it with a practiced efficiency that made me feel clumsy and useless just by proximity. He moved with a rhythm, a silent dance of purpose. Bedrolls, a heavy canvas tent, coolers packed with food, spools of wire, a chainsaw, post-hole diggers. He arranged it all in the truck bed, a perfect, logical puzzle. I just stood there, holding my own bag, feeling like a spare part. He hadn't said a word to me yet, hadn't even really looked at me. He was aware of me, I knew that much. I could feel the weight of his peripheral attention, a low-grade hum of energy at the edge of my awareness. Finally, when the truck was packed, he turned to me. His gaze wasn't hostile, or friendly, or anything I could easily categorize. It was just steady, appraising. He took in my clean jeans, my 2 new boots, my general air of urban displacement. "You know how to ride?" His voice was a low gravel, a sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. It vibrated in the air between us. "Some," I managed, the word feeling thin and inadequate. It was a half-truth. I'd been on a horse twice at a summer camp when I was 12. A corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smile. It was there and gone in a second, but I saw it. It was the most expression I had ever seen on his face. "Some is better than none," he said, the sound rumbling in the quiet morning. "Get in." He didn't wait for a response, just rounded the truck and slid into the driver's seat. I did as I was told, climbing into the passenger side, the worn vinyl of the bench seat cool against the back of my legs. The cab smelled of dust, faint machine oil, and something else, something that was just him. A clean, earthy scent, like cedar and dry soil. He started the engine, and the old truck shuddered to life. As we pulled away from the ranch house, leaving the familiar cluster of buildings shrinking in the rearview mirror, a profound sense of dislocation washed over me. I was heading into the wild, into a vast and empty landscape, with a man who was just as vast and unreadable. And a part of me, a part one had thought long dead, felt a flicker of something dangerously close to hope. The drive was long and mostly silent. The paved road gave way to gravel, then to a rutted dirt track that was little more than two parallel scars in the earth. Cole navigated it with an easy, one-handed confidence, his other arm resting on the open window frame. I watched his hand on the steering wheel, the knuckles strong, the fingers long and capable, a light dusting of dark hair across the back. The silence wasn't awkward, not really. It was his element, and I was just a guest in it. I tried to fill it in my own head, running through a list of potential conversation starters, but they all sounded stupid and frivolous. So, seen any good movies lately? Felt absurd when the landscape outside was more cinematic than anything Hollywood could dream up. We passed through wide, grassy valleys, the prairie grasses waving like a golden ocean. We climbed into foothills dotted with juniper and sagebrush, the air growing cooler, cleaner. I was an observer, and he was my subject. I cataloged the details. The way his eyes, the color of dark whiskey, constantly scanned the horizon. The faint, white line of a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The relaxed set of his shoulders, a stark contrast to the permanent knot of tension in my own. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the changing angle of the sun. He didn't turn on the radio. The only sounds were the growl of the engine and the crunch of tires on dirt. My own internal monologue was a frantic, buzzing thing. I was analyzing his every non-action. His silence wasn't empty. It was a statement. It said, I am comfortable here. I do not need to fill this space with noise, and my presence felt like an intrusion, a noisy, anxious variable in his calm equation. I wondered what he thought of me. The city boy playing cowboy. The quiet, sad guy who haunted his uncle's kitchen. Did he resent having to babysit me on this trip? Probably. I wouldn't blame him. I was, by all objective measures, useless out here. Finally, he spoke. We'll leave the truck here. Pack the horses the rest of the way. His voice startled me, and I jumped slightly. He glanced at me, and that ghost of a smile touched his lips again. Still with me? He asked. It wasn't a mocking question. It was genuine. He was checking in. Yeah, I said, my voice a little hoarse. Just quiet. He grunted, a sound of acknowledgement, and pulled the truck to a stop near a stand of aspens next to a rushing creek. The spot was clearly a familiar staging ground for him. A weathered hitching post stood waiting. He killed the engine, and the sudden, profound silence rushed back in, deeper this time. He was out of the truck before I'd even unbuckled my seatbelt, already moving to the horse trailer we'd been pulling. The next hour was a masterclass in his silent competence. He unloaded the two horses, a sturdy-looking bay and a smaller, gentler-looking chestnut. He spoke to them in that same low murmur I'd heard him use before, his hands moving over them with a firm, soothing confidence. He saddled the bay for himself, then turned to the chestnut. He glanced at me. This is Dusty. He's steady. He threw the saddle blanket over the horse's back, then the heavy leather saddle. He worked with an unhurried grace, tightening straps, adjusting buckles, his movements fluid and sure. I stood by, feeling my uselessness like a heavy coat. Want me to do something? I asked, the words feeling clumsy. He paused and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time all day. His gaze held mine for a beat too long, and I felt a strange heat creep up my neck. It was like he was seeing past the awkward exterior, searching for something inside. Just stay out of the way for now, he said, but the words lacked any sting. It was a simple statement of fact. Then he handed me the reins to Dusty. Just hold him. So I held the horse, stroking its soft nose, feeling the warmth of its breath on my palm. I watched Cole transfer supplies from the truck to the saddlebags. He packed with a foresight that spoke of years of experience. Everything had its place. Nothing was wasted. He moved around the horses in the truck with a dancer's awareness of his own space. Never a single misstep. My own body felt like a collection of awkward, ill-fitting parts. I was all sharp elbows and uncertain feet. He was a complete, integrated whole. Watching him was like watching a natural phenomenon, like observing the flow of water or the growth of a tree. It was mesmerizing. I found myself focusing on the small things, the way the muscles in his forearms flexed as he cinched a strap, the slight furrow of his brow as he concentrated on a knot, the way he brushed a stray piece of hair from his forehead with the back of his wrist. Each detail was a brushstroke in a portrait I was painting in my mind, a portrait of a man who was utterly, completely at home in his own skin. It was a feeling I couldn't remember ever having myself. All right, let's go. He swung himself up onto the bay horse in one smooth, effortless motion. He looked down at me, waiting. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I put my foot in the stirrup, grabbed the saddle horn, and hauled myself up with all the grace of a sack of potatoes. I landed heavily in the saddle, and Dusty shifted underneath me with a patient sigh. I fumbled with the reins, trying to remember what I was supposed to do with them. Cole watched me, his expression unreadable as ever. I expected a smirk, a sarcastic comment. Instead, he just nudged his horse forward. "He'll follow me," he said over his shoulder. "Just hold on." And with that, we left the truck behind and rode deeper into the wilderness. The rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves the only percussion in the symphony of silence. We rode for another 2 hours, climbing higher into the hills. The landscape became more rugged, the trail narrower. Cole led the way, his back a steady, reassuring presence ahead of me. I found a rhythm in the horse's gait, my body slowly learning to move with it instead of against it. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for months began to recede, replaced by a simple, physical exhaustion and a profound awareness of my surroundings. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. A hawk circled high overhead, its cry a lonely, piercing sound. I was so focused on the man in front of me, on the simple act of staying on my horse, that there was no room for the ghosts of my old life. There was only the sun on my face, the creak of leather, and the steady, broad shoulders of the man leading me deeper into the unknown. My internal analysis of him was relentless. Every gesture was a clue. When we stopped to let the horses drink from a stream, he dismounted and, without a word, came over to check my cinch, his hand brushing my leg as he tightened the strap. The contact was brief, impersonal, purely functional. But it sent a jolt through me that was anything but. My mind seized on it, replaying it, dissecting it. Was it accidental? Of course it was. But the warmth of his fingers lingered on the denim of my jeans long after he'd moved away. I watched him crouch by the water, splashing his face. The late afternoon sun caught the droplets on his skin, turning them to diamonds. He pushed his dark hair back from his forehead, and for a moment, his guard seemed to drop. He looked younger, less formidable. Just a man, tired from a long day. Then he looked up and caught me staring. I quickly looked away, my face burning, feeling like I'd been caught reading his diary. He didn't say anything, just stood up, wiped his face on his sleeve, and swung back onto his horse. The silence that followed felt different. It was heavier, charged with my own embarrassment. I was sure he knew. He must have seen the way I watched him. He was a perceptive man. It was evident in the way he understood the land and the animals. Surely, he could read me just as easily. I felt transparent, my pathetic longing laid bare for his inspection. I braced myself for the shift, for the cool distance that would surely follow. But it never came. He was the same as before. Steady, quiet, leading the way. Maybe he hadn't noticed. Or maybe, and this thought was both more terrifying and more thrilling, maybe he didn't mind. I spent the rest of the ride lost in a maze of my own making, turning over possibilities, second-guessing every glance, every silence. It was exhausting. We made camp as the sun began to dip below the peaks, casting long, dramatic shadows across the valley. The spot was a small, flat clearing sheltered by a grove of tall pines. Cole slid from his horse with the same easy grace he did everything and began the process of setting up with an unhurried competence. I dismounted, my legs feeling like jelly, and stood there, once again unsure of my role. "Untie the bedrolls," he said, not looking at me as he started to unsaddle his horse. "And gather some firewood." Small, dry stuff from under the trees, he gave me a task. A simple, concrete task. Relief washed over me. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I had a purpose. I fumbled with the knots on the saddlebags, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy, but I managed to get the bedrolls free. Then I set about gathering wood, the simple, repetitive action calming my frayed nerves. When I returned with an armful of dry branches, he already had the tent up. It was a simple canvas A-frame, just big enough for 2 sleeping bags with little room to spare. My heart gave a nervous thump. He had a small fire going in a ring of stones, the flames crackling cheerfully, spitting sparks into the deepening twilight. He was crouched by the fire, slicing vegetables into a cast-iron skillet. The scene was so domestic, so peaceful, it felt surreal. For a moment, it was easy to pretend this was something else entirely, that we weren't just 2 men on a work trip, that this quiet intimacy was normal. He looked up as I dropped the wood. "Good," he said, and the simple word of approval felt like a head rush. We ate in near silence, sitting on a fallen log by the fire. He'd cooked a simple but delicious meal of sausage, potatoes, and onions. The food was hot and filling, and I ate with an appetite I hadn't felt in months. The fire crackled between us, a living, breathing thing. The stars were beginning to appear in the vast, ink-black sky, more numerous and brilliant than I had ever seen them. The silence stretched, but this time it was comfortable, companionable. The shared work, the shared meal, it had forged a fragile connection between us. He was no longer just an enigma. He was the man who had cooked my dinner, the man whose sleeping bag was laid out a few feet from my own. "You don't talk much," he said, his voice a low rumble that didn't disturb the quiet. He was staring into the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering orange light. The question, or rather the observation, caught me off guard. "Not much to say, I guess," I replied, my own voice sounding thin. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned his head and looked at me. His gaze was direct, searching. Everyone's got something to say. He wasn't pushing, just stating a fact. He was giving me an opening, an invitation. I could have deflected, made a joke, changed the subject. But something about the moment, the fire, the stars, the immense, lonely beauty of our surroundings, made me want to be honest. Or at least a little bit honest. "My life got loud," I said, the words tasting strange. "I came out here for the quiet," he nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. He seemed to be weighing my words, finding the truth in them. "Sometimes quiet is the loudest thing there is," he said, his voice soft. And in that moment, I felt seen, truly seen. He understood. He wasn't just the stoic, capable foreman. There was a depth to him, a quiet wisdom that I had completely overlooked. He understood loneliness. He understood the need for escape. He held my gaze for another long moment, and the space between us crackled with an unspoken understanding. Then he looked back at the fire, and the moment passed. But something had shifted. A wall had come down, brick by silent brick. Later, lying in my sleeping bag inside the tent, the reality of our proximity was overwhelming. He was less than 2 feet away, a warm, solid presence in the darkness. I could hear the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. I could smell the faint scent of wood smoke that clung to him. I lay on my back, staring up at the canvas roof, my mind racing. Every nerve in my body was alight, hyper-aware of the man beside me. I was terrified of moving, of making a sound that might betray the frantic beating of my own heart. This was an intimacy my body had craved for so long, yet my mind was screaming with anxiety. He was just my uncle's foreman. This was just a work trip. I was reading everything wrong, projecting my own desperate loneliness onto a man who was probably just being decent. He shifted, rolling onto his side to face me. I froze, holding my breath. I couldn't see his face in the pitch black of the tent, but I could feel his presence, his warmth, aimed directly at me. Is he awake? Does he feel this, too? The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken questions. I thought about what he'd said, about quiet being the loudest thing. The silence in the tent was deafening. It was filled with the frantic monologue in my head, the tension in my muscles, the yearning that was a physical ache in my chest. I wanted to reach out, to close the small distance between us, to feel the solid reality of him and know I wasn't just imagining this current between us. But I did nothing. Fear was a cold, heavy blanket, pinning me in place. After what felt like an eternity, his breathing deepened again, settling back into the slow rhythm of sleep. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my body trembling with a mixture of relief and disappointment. I had done nothing. I was a passive observer of my own life, even in my dreams. The next day, we worked. We found the down fence line along the creek, just as Ben had predicted. A half-dozen heavy timber posts had been snapped like twigs by a falling cottonwood. The wire was a tangled mess. It was hard, physical labor. Cole used the chainsaw to clear the fallen tree, the roar of it echoing through the valley. I dug new post holes, my soft city hands quickly blistering, my back and shoulders screaming in protest. Cole worked with a relentless, steady pace, never seeming to tire. He showed me how to stretch the wire, how to use the tool to attach it to the posts, his hands often brushing mine as he guided me. Each touch was a small fire on my skin. He was patient, a surprisingly good teacher, correcting my clumsy attempts without a hint of condescension. We fell into a rhythm, a nonverbal communication of shared tasks. He would start a staple, and I would be there with the hammer to finish it. I would hold a post steady while he tamped the earth around it. We were a team. In the middle of the afternoon, the sky turned a bruised, ugly purple. The wind picked up, whipping through the trees, carrying the scent of rain. "Storm's coming in fast," Cole said, looking at the clouds rolling over the mountains. "We need to get back to camp." Now there was an urgency in his voice I hadn't heard before. We quickly packed up the tools and mounted the horses, urging them into a trot back the way we came. The first drops of rain, fat and cold, began to fall as our campsite came into view. By the time we'd dismounted and tied the horses, the drizzle had turned into a torrential downpour. The wind howled, and the little canvas tent, which had seemed so sturdy the night before, looked terrifyingly fragile. "Forget the tent," Cole yelled over the roar of the wind. "There's an old line shack about a half-mile up that ridge. We can shelter there." He grabbed a bag with our food and the first aid kit, and I grabbed the bedrolls. We ran, heads down against the driving rain, scrambling up a rocky, slippery path I hadn't even noticed before. The rain soaked us through in seconds, cold and miserable. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I saw it. A small, dark shape against the gray sky. A tiny, one-room cabin, barely more than a shed, built of rough-hewn logs. Cole pushed open the heavy wooden door, and we stumbled inside, dripping and gasping for breath. He slammed the door shut, plunging us into a semi-darkness that smelled of old wood, dust, and mice. The roar of the storm was instantly muffled, reduced to a dull drumming on the roof. The shack was tiny. A small, dirty window on one wall let in a little gray light. There was a crude wooden bunk against the far wall, a small, rusted wood stove in the corner, and not much else. The space was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. It was impossibly small. We stood there, dripping on the dusty floorboards, the space between us charged and electric. The storm had stripped away all pretense. We weren't foreman and ranch hand anymore. We were just two men, trapped together in a box, smelling of rain and wet earth. He was so close I could see the water droplets clinging to his eyelashes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. He started moving, his practical nature taking over. He found an old lantern and, after a moment, got it lit, casting a warm, flickering glow around the small space. He unrolled our wet sleeping bags and draped them over the bunk, hoping they would dry. I just stood there, shivering, watching him. My mind had gone completely blank. All the overthinking, the analyzing, it had all been washed away by the rain. There was only this room, this man, this moment. He turned to me, and the lantern light carved his face into sharp angles and soft shadows. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his wet shirt clung to his chest and shoulders. He looked at me, really looked at me, and his unreadable expression finally broke. I saw something in his eyes then, something I couldn't name but recognized on a primal level. It was a mirror of the ache in my own chest. This is it. The thought is not a product of analysis, but a sudden, sharp certainty. It's here. Now. The air is thick, not just with the smell of rain and old wood, but with years of my unspoken want. My entire body is a live wire. He takes a step toward me, and the floorboards creak, the sound as loud as a gunshot in the tiny room. He stops, barely a foot away. I can see the pulse beating in his throat, a steady, rhythmic thump. My own heart is a frantic bird, beating against the cage of my ribs. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His eyes are saying everything. They ask a question, and I answer it by not moving, by not breathing, by holding his gaze. He lifts a hand, slowly, deliberately, as if not to spook a wild animal. I watch it move through the space between us. His fingers are wet and cold when they touch my face, his thumb gently brushing the rain from my cheek. The touch is electric. A fire races from that single point of contact, spreading through every vein, every nerve ending. My eyes flutter shut. I am giving in. I am surrendering to this thing that has been building between us since the moment I first saw him. This silent, powerful current that has pulled me steadily, inevitably, toward this exact point in time. He moves closer still. I can feel the warmth of his body seeping into mine, chasing away the cold of the rain. His other hand comes up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my wet hair. The gesture is possessive, yet unbelievably gentle. "Leo," he says, his voice a low, rough whisper. My name. The way he says it, it's not just a word. It's a key, unlocking something deep inside me. I open my eyes. He is all I can see. The world has shrunk to the space of this tiny shack, to the inches between our faces. The storm outside rages, a wild, chaotic soundtrack to the storm inside me. And then he leans in and kisses me. It's not a soft, hesitant kiss. It's a kiss of certainty, of release. It's the culmination of every stolen glance, every accidental touch, every unspoken thought. His lips are firm and cool from the rain, but they warm quickly against mine. It is a kiss that tastes of the storm, of longing, of a silence finally, blessedly broken. I kiss him back with a desperation that surprises me, my hands coming up to grip his arms, holding on to him like he's the only solid thing in a world that has just tilted off its axis. The tack room from the prompt was a metaphor, I realize now. Any small, confined space would do. A place where the world falls away and there is only the truth. He pulls back slightly, just enough to rest his forehead against mine. We are both breathing heavily, our breath mingling in the cold air. I keep my eyes closed, trying to burn this moment into my memory. The feel of his hands on me, the scent of him, the taste of him on my lips. I've been wanting to do that, he says, his voice a low vibration against my skin. Since the day you showed up at the ranch looking like a lost dog, a shaky laugh escapes me. It's the most honest, vulnerable sound I have made in years. It's a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't crazy. He felt it, too. He braces one hand against the rough log wall behind me, caging me in, and the other hand moves from my neck down to my chest. He flattens his palm over my heart, and I'm sure he can feel it hammering against his hand. He lowers his head and kisses me again, slower this time, more deliberate. It's a kiss of exploration, a question and an answer all at once. It's not rushed. It feels right, honest. My hands slide from his arms up to his shoulders, then around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepens, and the last of my fear, the last of my carefully constructed walls, crumbles into dust. There is no past, no future, only this small, warm space and the man in my arms. He leads me to the bunk, his hand finding mine, our fingers lacing together. The simple gesture feels monumental, a binding contract. He sits on the edge of the bunk and pulls me down to sit beside him. The old wooden frame groans in protest. The lantern sputters, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm continues its assault, but in here, there is a profound sense of peace, of safety. He doesn't let go of my hand. He just holds it, his thumb stroking gently over my knuckles. We don't speak for a long time. There's no need. The silence is no longer a void. It's full. It's full of everything that just happened and everything that is about to. He lifts my hand, turns it over, and presses a soft kiss to my palm. The gesture is so tender, so unexpected, it makes my throat tighten. This man of stone and silence, this stoic protector, is capable of a gentleness that undoes me completely. He is the quiet I was searching for, and the noise I didn't know I needed. He is everything. The morning after was a study in quiet awkwardness. I woke first, disoriented. The storm had passed. Pale morning light filtered through the grimy window, painting the dusty air in stripes of gray and gold. My first coherent thought was of him. I turned my head, and there he was, asleep on the other side of the narrow bunk. We had slept in our clothes, wrapped in our still damp bedrolls, the small space forcing a proximity that was both thrilling and terrifying in the light of day. In sleep, his face was relaxed, the hard lines softened. He looked younger, almost vulnerable. A lock of dark hair had fallen across his forehead. I had the strongest urge to reach out and brush it away, but I didn't. I was paralyzed by a sudden, crushing wave of anxiety. What now? What did that kiss, those kisses mean? Was it just a product of the storm, of the forced intimacy of the shack? A momentary lapse? The fear that he would regret it, that he would wake up and erect those silent walls again, was a cold knot in my stomach. I slid carefully from the bunk, my movements slow and deliberate, trying not to wake him. The floorboards creaked, and I froze, my heart pounding, but he didn't stir. I tiptoed to the door and eased it open. The world outside was washed clean, glistening and new. The air was cool and crisp, smelling of wet pine and rich earth. The sky was a pale, cloudless blue. It was beautiful, but I couldn't appreciate it. My mind was a chaotic mess of doubt and fear. I had let myself be vulnerable. I had opened a door I had kept locked for years, and now I was terrified of what would happen next. I stood on the small, rickety porch of the shack, hugging myself against the morning chill, and waited. I was reverting to my old self, the passive observer, waiting for life to happen to me. I heard him move inside the shack, the sound of him stretching, the groan of the bunk. My back tensed. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. I just stared out at the valley, my jaw clenched. I braced myself for the silence, for the polite but distant tone he would use, for the moment when he would pretend last night never happened. The door creaked open behind me. I didn't move. I felt him step out onto the porch, felt his presence behind me, a warm weight in the cool air. He stood there for a long moment, saying nothing. The silence stretched, and with every second, my anxiety grew, twisting into a bitter certainty. I was a fool. A lonely, pathetic fool who had misread everything. Then he spoke. His voice was low, a little rough with sleep. "Didn't sleep much," he said. I still didn't turn. My throat was too tight to speak. Kept thinking. He continued, his voice closer now, right behind me. "Woke up this morning, and the first thing I thought was that I wanted to see if you were still here." The words were simple, direct, and they disarmed me completely. All the scenarios I had played out in my head, all the anxious predictions, they all evaporated in the face of his quiet, simple honesty. I finally turned to face him. He was standing there, his hair a mess from sleep, his shirt rumpled. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear and steady, and they were fixed on me. He wasn't looking at me with regret. He was looking at me with a quiet intensity that made my breath catch. He took the final step that closed the distance between us. He didn't kiss me. He just reached out and took my hand, his warm, calloused fingers wrapping around my cold ones. It was the same gesture from the night before, a simple lacing of fingers, but in the clear light of day, it felt even more significant. It was a reassurance, a promise. "I'm not good with words, Leo," he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "But last night wasn't a mistake. Not for me." Relief washed through me, so potent it made my knees weak. I squeezed his hand, unable to form a coherent response. I just nodded, a stupid, jerky motion. He seemed to understand. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, the kind I was beginning to realize was reserved just for me. "Good," he said softly. "Now, I'm going to try and make coffee on that rusty stove." No promises, the mundane, practical statement broke the tension, and I let out a real laugh. The sound felt good, clean and bright in the morning air. It was the sound of a new beginning. The return to the main ranch was the test. The intimacy we had found in the isolation of the mountains felt fragile, a secret that might not survive in the real world. As we rode back, the easy companionship remained, but a new tension began to creep in. What would happen when we were surrounded by other people? By my uncle? Would we revert to our old roles, foreman and quiet nephew? The thought filled me with a familiar dread. Back at the truck, we loaded the horses and the gear in a comfortable, practiced silence. The drive back was different from the drive out. The silence was no longer a void I felt compelled to fill with my own anxious thoughts. It was a shared space, comfortable and full. He reached over and rested his hand on my knee for a moment, a simple, grounding touch that said everything I needed to hear. Still, I worried. When we pulled up to the ranch house, it felt like returning from another planet. The other hands were milling about, the familiar sounds and routines of the ranch a jarring contrast to the profound quiet we had just left. Cole got out of the truck and was immediately absorbed back into his role, fielding questions about the fence line, giving orders. He was the foreman again, and I was just Leo, standing awkwardly by the truck. He didn't look at me. My heart sank. The bubble had burst. It was over before it had even begun. I grabbed my bag from the truck, my shoulders slumping, and started walking toward the bunkhouse, the old feelings of isolation and loneliness crashing back down on me with a vengeance. I didn't even make it to the door. Leo, his voice cut through the noise of the ranch yard, sharp and clear. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I heard his boots on the gravel behind me. He stopped a few feet away. I could feel the eyes of the other men on us. "Dinner's at 6, he said, his voice back to its normal, impassive tone. "Be at my cabin at 5:30. We'll walk over together." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A quiet declaration in front of everyone. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't pretending. He was choosing. I turned around slowly and met his gaze across the yard. He gave me a short, almost imperceptible nod. It was all I needed. The knot of fear in my chest loosened, replaced by a warm, spreading hope. I nodded back. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with a stupid, hopeful smile I couldn't wipe off my face. His cabin was small and tidy, set away from the main house and the noise of the bunkhouse. It smelled of him, that same scent of cedar and clean earth. When I knocked on his door at 5:30, he opened it and just stood there for a moment, looking at me. He had showered and changed into a clean shirt. The look on his face was one of quiet possession, a look that said, "You are here. Where you were supposed to be." He stepped aside to let me in. The inside of the cabin was simple, masculine, and comfortable. A worn leather armchair, a shelf full of books, a neatly made bed. It was a sanctuary, his sanctuary, and he had invited me in. He didn't say anything, just walked over to me, put his hands on my shoulders, and kissed me. It was a slow, deep kiss that tasted of certainty. It was a kiss that said, "This is real." Here, too, when he pulled away, he rested his forehead against mine, just like he had in the shack. "My cabin has a better view than the bunkhouse," he said, his voice a low murmur. "If you're interested," it was an offer. An offer of a key, of a space, of a future. "I'm interested," I whispered back, my voice thick with emotion. We never made it to dinner. We stayed in his cabin, and the world outside fell away once more. The quiet intimacy of that evening was more profound than any grand declaration. We talked. I told him about my life in the city, about the noise I was running from. He told me about growing up on a ranch, about the peace he found in the solitude of the mountains. We learned the topography of each other, not just with words, but with slow hands and soft kisses. There was no pretense, no fear, just a quiet, steady unfolding. Lying in his bed, with his arm thrown possessively over my waist and his steady breathing a comfort against my back, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. I felt like I had finally, after a lifetime of searching, come home. The final weeks of summer bled into a golden autumn. My life found a new rhythm, one that was measured not by deadlines and spreadsheets, but by the rising and setting of the sun and the quiet, steady presence of the man I loved. Our relationship wasn't a secret, but it was private. It was in the small gestures. The way he would seek me out during the day, just to share a look across the dusty corral. The way his hand would find mine for a brief, reassuring squeeze when no one was looking. The way he started leaving a pot of coffee on for me in his cabin every morning. The other hands knew, of course. They weren't blind. There were a few sideways glances, a couple of muttered comments that died when Cole fixed the speaker with his flat, steady gaze. But mostly, they left us alone. Our quiet, solid happiness was a fact, as undeniable as the mountains on the horizon. One cool October morning, I woke up in his bed before dawn. I slipped out from under his heavy arm and went to the window. A low mist was settled in the valley, and the first hints of pink were painting the eastern sky. The world was quiet, still, and breathtakingly beautiful. I was no longer a ghost here. I was a part of this landscape. I had put down roots in this rocky soil. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Cole standing behind me, a blanket draped over his bare shoulders. He didn't speak, just came to stand beside me, wrapping the blanket and his arms around me from behind. We stood there together, watching the sunrise. His chin rested on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. "You're not going back, are you?" he asked, his voice a quiet rumble against my ear. It was a question we had never spoken aloud, the one uncertainty that still lingered in the corners of my mind. My old life felt like a story about someone else. The ambition, the anxiety, the noise, it all seemed so foreign now. I thought about the man I was when I arrived, a hollowed-out shell of a person, just an observer. And I thought about the man I was now, standing here, wrapped in the arms of a man who had taught me the meaning of quiet strength, of a love that didn't need loud declarations to be real, a love that was as steady and enduring as the mountains themselves. I leaned my head back against his chest, feeling the slow, strong beat of his heart against my back. "No," I said, the word full of a certainty that resonated deep in my soul. "I'm not going back." He tightened his arms around me, a silent affirmation. We stood there, watching the sun crest the mountains, painting the world in shades of orange and gold. The silence was perfect. It was full of everything that mattered. It was home.